Hi, my name's Bedina and I'm the Education Officer at the History House here in Armadale. Welcome to this first part of the Anzac videos that we're going to do here in the History House. This morning I would like to focus on what it was like for the soldiers and the nurses that were going to war, focusing on the stories of our local soldiers. Now I'm going to pop these gloves on, and the reason for that is some of the objects that I'm going to show you, in fact most of the objects I'm going to show you, are over 100 years old, and I don't want to be transferring any of the possible dirt or oils that I have on my hands to these objects and in that way damaging them. So I will be wearing these gloves for the duration of the video. Alright, the first object I'd like to show you is the soldier's uniform, which we have right here. This uniform belonged to a soldier from, well, he enlisted in Kalgoorlie, but he belonged to the Armadale area, named John Hickson. Now, John Hickson actually enlisted under his father's name, Tomlinson. So you can see here his kit bag has the name Tomlinson written on it. However, we know him as John Hickson, so I'll be referring to him as Hickson. Now, Hickson wore this uniform when he was sent to France in World War I. I'm going to briefly go through the uniform, starting with the slouch hat. So this is the slouch hat. The design follows similar to the Australian bush hat, with that wide rim that was really good for keeping off the sun and the rain. The extra thing here is the little clip, which was really handy to clip up the one side so that when the soldier was holding his gun and bayonet, the bayonet wouldn't knock the hat off. An extra thing we also see on this one is the oval here, red and blue. This is also on the soldier's shoulder of his jacket, and that indicated which battalion he belonged to. So we know from this that Hickson belonged to the 3rd Battalion, and he was actually part of the artillery division where he was responsible for moving ammunition from wherever the backlines were to the front lines of the battle. So that's the slouch hat. The jacket, we can see here, made of this heavy merino wool, quite thick and rough, which means that it didn't wear very quickly, so perfect material for the battlefronts. We can see on the lapels of the collar here the badge of the rising sun, which indicated that the soldier came from the Australian Army. And on the shoulder of the soldier's uniform, we can also see a small lapel that says Australia on it, also indicating that he comes from Australia. His trousers, made of the same material as his jacket, weren't quite full length because the soldiers around the lower half of their legs, their shins, would wear puttees or leather leggings like these. And the purpose for that was to give them extra protection. Remembering, of course, in World War I, that a lot of the machinery that we think about when we think about war, like tanks or aeroplanes or big trucks, those sorts of things weren't really around, and a lot of the work that was done with horse and cart still. So they did need that extra protection and support on their lower legs. And of course, their solid leather boots would also help with that kind of protection. When John Hickson came home from World War I, he packed up his uniform into his kit bag, put it in the back of his shed, and never looked at it again. Soldiers weren't the only ones that would be sent out to the battlefront. Nurses also were sent out to the battlefront to do a lot of the first aid work. This is a nurse's uniform. It's not an original. This is a costume piece, but it still gives us a very, very good indication of what a nurse's uniform would have looked like. They would have a linen veil like this, not only to keep the nurse's hair back, but also to show their rank in the nursing system. Under that, they would be wearing this red or scarlet cape, which was also called a washing cape, and this bibbed apron. Now, the two of these were worn partly to help keep the nurse warm, but more so because the apron and the washing cape were very easy to remove and keep clean, washing each day for hygiene purposes. Underneath the apron, they would have this heavy grey ward dress, which was standard issue for World War I nurses. Locally, we had 3 girls from Armadale that enlisted as nurses in World War I. The picture of the woman in the middle here is Alice Maud Martin. She was one of the girls that enlisted. Her 4 brothers, also shown here, also all enlisted in World War I. Now, thankfully, all 5 of the Martin children did survive World War I. The 4 boys all came home and settled back in the local area, but Alice actually met a captain of the English Army when she was working over there, and she stayed back in England and married him. When we think about different occupations that the battle required, we often do think about soldiers and nurses, but there were so many different kinds of jobs that were necessary to ensure that the soldiers and nurses were receiving what they needed. And one of these jobs included being a stretcher bearer. Now, this is a stretcher that is probably from surplus of World War II, but stretchers in World War I would have been very similar, made of this really sturdy canvas, and that was held by these strong wooden posts here, on the other side supported by a metal joist that you can see across the back. These stretchers were quite heavy, and of course you add the weight of a soldier to it, and it would be heavy and dangerous work for the stretcher bearers that would have to run out onto the battlefield, load the injured soldiers onto here and get them to the closest first aid post or hospital. Now, in Kelmscott, we did have a stretcher bearer that was awarded a military medal in 1917. His name was Hubert Armstrong, and when he received his medal, this is what they said about him, and I quote, "His splendid work as a stretcher bearer in going to the assistance and collecting of wounded men under very heavy shell fire and at great personal risk was entirely due to their gallantry and devotion to duty, that the casualties were cleared quickly and many lives were saved." The challenges that were faced by soldiers and nurses didn't just include the dangers that stretcher bearers had running out onto the battlefield. This little service dispatch book shows shrapnel damage across the bottom here. This belonged to Private William Hart, and he was sent to Gallipoli when he went to war, and on landing at Anzac Cove he received some serious injuries to his legs. He was evacuated, sent to a hospital, recovered, came back to Gallipoli and received serious injury a second time, and this time including his shoulders and upper chest. And this booklet was in his chest pocket when he received that injury. So there is an indication of some of the challenges that they faced. Now, Private William Hart did survive the war. He came back to become an orchardist in Roleystone after the war. But this does give us some indication of the challenges that were faced by soldiers on the forefront of battle. And it didn't just include bullets coming at them from the enemy. It included cramped conditions. It included disease that was spread through the trenches by rats, by flies. It also included things like serious rationing of food and water. So conditions were extremely tough for the soldiers despite being at war. Not every soldier was only fighting on the front lines. Some of the soldiers were also captured by the enemy. And we have here an example of a New Testament Bible from Claude Marsh. And Claude Marsh was a local soldier who was sent to France, and he was captured by the German soldiers and held in a German prison of war. This little diary he kept in his Bible because it was not allowed for the prisoners of war to keep diaries, but he kept a diary in the front of his Bible, and the entire diary has been transcribed, and we do have a copy at the History House. Now that you've heard some of the stories of our local soldiers and what it was like to be fighting on the front lines of battle, I'll really encourage you to do some more of your own research, and you can go to the website Birtwhistle Wiki that you should see on the bottom of the screen to find out the stories of any of our local soldiers.